am Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to StansberryInvestor.com. And our summer series continues with my guest today. He is Jim Bovard. He is a columnist for USA Today and a frequent contributor to The Hill, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and he recently just penned a really interesting article for Zero Hedge. So I thought I need to meet this man and have him on the show. Jim, nice to be speaking with you for the first time here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that.
Now, you also are a self-proclaimed libertarian.
Self-proclaimed libertarian. It sounds like part of a federal indictment. He admitted it. He admitted it.
Well, you write, to a lot of topics that speak to the heart of that. And one of the things I want to talk about with you today, because like I said, you write on a variety of subjects, but it's this war on cash that it seems we are presently living in. For those out there, the war on cash refers to a set of policies in the United States and around the world deploying the power of government agencies to suppress the use of paper currency. Some would say a secondary aim is to raise the cost of cash storage so as to allow the central bank to push nominal interest rates further below zero. Well, doesn't that just sound like the world we're living in right now, Jim?
Yeah, this is certainly the trend we're going in. It's interesting. I did a book beating up in the Clinton administration in 2000. It was entitled "Feeling Your Pain," and I was talking about the growing surveillance at that point, and I had a quote in there from a Federal Reserve economist who basically said it would be great to basically ban cash and let government have total control over how people had their money and how long they had it. A number of book reviewers bashed me for being totally paranoid at that point. Paranoia is defined on a sliding scale these days. There was a wonderful quote from a German economist. He said, "Cash is printed freedom." And that's something which resonates with me intensely. You flip back 4 or 5 years, I was watching how things went down in India when the government confiscated all the small bills from people, and to see how that devastated the low-income folks who could not afford to keep their savings in a bank. You had a government just blowing up, tens of millions of people's lives for its own convenience. And there have always been a lot of good reasons to distrust government on currency. And a war on cash is going to quickly become a war on freedom of choice, because there's a lot of folks who I know who like to, who hate credit cards, who hate other things that could allow them to be tracked. And I mean, it's, the whole question of a war on cash is also a question of a war on privacy, because the whole idea that government agents, government bureaucrats should be permitted to know everything, how you spend your money. There was a friend of mine, Kevin Dowd, an economist in the UK, recently did a piece for the Daily Telegraph that did a great job of walking through the points of why the war on cash becomes a war on freedom.
Right, and I read that article with great interest, and I urge everyone out there to read it. Although it's behind a paywall, but if you can read it.
Okay, well.
Hate those paywalls. But anyhow, I want to know, what do you think is posing the greatest threat to cash today? So you mentioned credit cards. We've been living with credit cards for decades now, but more so than ever now. Is it cryptocurrencies? Is it the Fed and their policies of, a zero interest rate environment? Or is it the push towards central banks and digital currencies?
I think it might be the last 2 points, because the central banks have never been trustworthy. They certainly don't exist for your benefit or my benefit. I'm assuming you're not a billionaire. But this push for zero interest or negative interest, this is like it's turning people into serfs in their own lives. It's like that the government has a right to come by and seize 10% of your cows and chickens every year with this negative interest rate stuff. Certainly if it happened here, it would be the government effectively making personal savings into a federal crime. And they've already done that pretty well for the last 10 or 12 years with these zero interest rates. There's a very explicit choice to sacrifice people who had accumulated for a rainy day. Part of what amuses me is at the same time there's a push for the government to start doing for the public schools and to start doing financial education for the kids. And I'm thinking like, this is the last place I'd want to learn about finances is from a government employee. It's the same as my objection to having more civics classes in high school. I mean, the government's the last place to learn about dangers to freedom.
So who wins ultimately here? Is it the governments? Because it seems to me the banks would lose, and aren't they best friends with the central banks here?
I assume that there'd be all kinds of sweetheart deals. It's a question of how the system was rigged, what sort of favors were permitted, what sort of first preference. I don't know exactly how it would work out, but I'm glad you're raising the issue and pushing back and recognizing that this is a real peril. It's not just simply a story on page 3 of the finance section.
No, and I want to bring it to the forefront here, and I feel it ties in well with another great article you recently wrote on the 50th anniversary of us getting off a gold standard. But isn't it interesting how, we had a currency pegged to gold, then there was a fight for fiat, right? The central banks love fiat. And now it's, well, let's destroy paper fiat and create a digital realm.
Yeah, I mean, it's taking people hostage. I mean, because if you combine that with the Chinese style social credit score, I mean, people who have bad ideas or people, something as simple as vaccination. There's a lot of governors and mayors who are pushing, trying to make vaccines mandatory for people and vaccine passports. So if you've got an all digital currency and you didn't get the booster number 7 for COVID, then whoops, well, you just lost 20% of your income. I mean, it's a way, part of what's great about gold and hard cash is it's a way to maintain your independence. And that's something the founding fathers realized. They realized the economic foundation for individual freedom. But if you're having to go to the government and rattle your tin cup every time you want to spend your money, you're starting out hostage.
Now, Jim, I know you're a columnist. You're not a financial advisor, but how are you protecting yourself? You mentioned gold. I mean, do you prefer, if you don't mind sharing with us, holding assets in cryptocurrencies or gold or alternative assets than cash right now?
Well, it's sort of like a parallel. I've written about a lot of legal cases, the government abuses, and folks sometimes talk show hosts will ask my legal advice, and the first advice I give is never take legal advice from a college dropout. So, but it was Virginia Tech. It was a good college. I don't know. I think some kind of blend. I'm fond of gold. So, but I wouldn't put much stock in my opinion. So
just I guess you had a vision 10 years ago and people thought you were crazy. Where do you see the world?
See, I've got to clarify. So that was why people thought I was crazy back then. People think I'm crazy for different reasons now.
Okay. Well, how do you see the world 10 years from now?
Go ahead.
Jim, how do you see the world 10 years from now? And how do we protect ourselves? I mean,
oh, God, gold, silver, being wary of government, because it's kind of chilling to see the enthusiasm for endless government handouts that we're seeing from the Biden administration, and the cheerleading from so-called modern monetary theory, which is just it's like Keynes on amphetamines, and it's there's a fundamental problem is that people are profoundly unrealistic when they look at political and government power. There's a lot of people who seem to think that the politicians can do magic if they love the people. That was something that French socialists said 200 years ago. It was crap then, it's crap now. It's like, and it's something that's become clear in the last week or so, or last couple of weeks, is that the policymakers in Washington completely ignored the lessons of history in Afghanistan. And there were so many warning signs that they just completely ignored, and they felt they were so smart or so wonderful, or that they had a right to spend all this money and kill a lot of innocent people, including sending innocent American soldiers to their death. It's not any different on financial policy. You have the same level of folly, the same level of arrogance, and the same danger of a catastrophic end.
What do you mentioning the Fed, obviously you're a libertarian, and I'm guessing here you'd like to end the Fed.
Sure.
But what do you think should be the Fed's next move here?
It would be great if the Fed could be transparent and honest. I mean, it's sort of like, sort of like wishing for a unicorn. But the Fed's secrecy and string pulling, I think, is profound, poses a profound financial risk, systemic risk to the American economy. At some point, this game is going to stop, and when it does, there are going to be so many houses of cards that collapse. I don't know when it's going to collapse, but I'm not sure when the game is going to end. But I mean, the Fed has done this endless stimulation, and it's, you can't throw bad money after good forever. At some point, the credit is going to be lost. It might be a whole lot sooner than people think. So.
And that's such a good point. And I think about the money printing, and we've said, how long can it go on for? But look how long it has been going on for. Keeps me up at night. I think, how does this eventually play out or end? Or do you need a Fed chair to come in with a completely different vision to change things around? And when could that possibly happen?
Yeah, well, the huge question is, at what point does this stuff hit the fan? At what point does the credibility end? It's interesting. I started reading a lot about finances and stuff like that in the mid-1970s, and there was a wonderful private report called the France PIC Currency Report, and it talked about how the world's major currencies were going to die, and well, they didn't die, but they really got sick. If you look at the time from Nixon's taking this off the gold standard, the inflation has been 570%. Nixon promised it would stabilize, that his act would stabilize it, but it didn't. It's funny, going back to 1974, when there were a lot of economic crises back then, there were folks I was reading then who said, well, this is, for 30 years, the US has been living beyond its means. A lot of deficit spending, a lot of foreign borrowing, and now it's all coming due. Well, yeah, it had been doing that, and it's still getting away with it. So it's sort of like trying to figure out at what point people are going to stop believing lies from politicians.
I guess my last question to you, Jim, and it again goes back to your recent article on the gold standard. Obviously, make the case that the economy was better under a gold standard than the fiat regime we're in. I mean, could you see a possibility of it ever returning?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Something like that, or some combination of assets, would be used to buttress a currency to give it an anchor. I mean, I'm still thinking that at some point Americans are going to realize that the entire political class, this isn't just Biden. This is Trump spent recklessly as well, as every president since basically Eisenhower. So, and at some point, people are going to recognize that they can't trust politicians to have so much arbitrary power over their financial survival. And that was one of the wonderful things about the Constitution and the early wisdom. I mean, George Washington had a great line about how paper currencies were basically a total invitation for scoundrels, which they certainly brought out. And so hopefully at some point, Americans will recognize the need to leash politicians, both with the Constitution and as far as the money.
Very well said. Jim Bovard, I appreciated this conversation. Come back soon to StansberryInvestor.com.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. We'll have much more for you, so be sure to stay tuned. In the meantime, don't forget to register for premier access to videos you can't get anywhere else at DanielaCambone.com. Thanks for watching.